The fluorescent lights of the Orion Auditorium lobby always cast a sickly yellow glow, a color I've come to associate with institutional indifference. It was the same shade that coated the walls of the small, windowless office I occupied, the one tucked away in the deepest corner of the system's integration wing. The office people only visited when something vital had already broken. Tonight, however, the yellow felt different. It felt like a warning, a thin, toxic film spread over a lie. I stood perfectly still, my hand gripping a crystal flute of celebratory champagne, its bubbles mocking the cold, hollow pit in my stomach. My name is Alara Vance. For the last 7 years, I have been the invisible foundation of Ascendant Global. You know their name. Everyone does. They build the algorithms that predict the future, the AI models that guide multinational investment, the neural networks that power everything from deep-sea exploration to orbital satellite stabilization. They are lauded as innovators, as pioneers. And tonight was the night of the Mercury Prize Gala, the event where their latest, greatest achievement, the Nexus project, would be recognized. The project that had consumed me, body and soul, for the last 30 months. 30 months of 12 to 18-hour days. 30 months of sleeping on a camp cot next to the server racks, the gentle hum of the cooling fans, a constant, low-frequency lullaby. 30 months of debugging trillion-parameter models in the pre-dawn hours, the rest of the world silent, unaware that the stability of their digital economy rested on my ability to find a single, misplaced semicolon in a mountain of legacy code. 30 months of being the firewall, the cleaner, the architect, and the plumber, all rolled into one, thanklessly ensuring that the magnificent intellectual skyscraper built by others never crumbled into dust. I wasn't a data scientist on paper. I wasn't a C-suite executive. My title was quaint, deliberately vague, Chief Technical Liaison. In reality, I was the ultimate troubleshooter, the one who stitched together the brilliant but often incompatible pieces developed by a dozen different, highly specialized teams. I was the person who took the abstract theories of Dr. Alastair Hayes and Dr. Sonia Chen and hammered them into a functioning, scalable, secure reality. The Nexus project, the world's first truly global, self-optimizing energy grid, was a marvel of theoretical physics and machine learning. But the system that ran it, the operating framework that kept its billion moving parts from tearing themselves apart, that was mine. All mine. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like ash. The crowd around me was a sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering couture. They laughed, their voices resonating with the self-satisfied confidence that comes from inhabiting the top of the professional food chain. They were discussing the inevitable triumph. The accolades were already pre-written, the acceptance speeches rehearsed. I looked towards the colossal main stage. It dominated the front of the auditorium, a sleek multi-tiered structure bathed in the ethereal blue and white light of the Ascendant Global logo. 2 large screens flanked it, currently displaying a looping montage of high-definition, inspirational imagery. Clean energy farms, spinning server racks, people with perfect smiles looking thoughtfully at laptops. The memory of the meeting was still raw, a festering wound beneath the silk of my dress. It was 3 days ago. A final logistics run-through in the CEO's penthouse suite. Marcus Thorne, a man whose charisma was inversely proportional to his actual technical knowledge, sat at the head of a massive mahogany table. Dr. Hayes, the theoretical physicist, was to his right, adjusting his perpetually crooked bow tie. Dr. Chen, the lead machine learning expert, was to his left, her expression a mix of ambition and thinly veiled exhaustion. "All right, final rundown on the stage walk-up," Thorne had said, flattening his silver hair. "Hayes, Chen, you'll be on the main tier with me accepting the statue. You two are the faces, the brains, the story." He paused, looking directly at me, my name a formality he couldn't quite recall. "Alara, you'll be down here near the front of the seating. When I mention the technical integration framework, and I will very graciously, you'll stand, nod, and take a small, symbolic bow. It shows the whole team is present, but keeps the focus where it belongs, on the vision and the science." I remember my response was calm, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic shift happening in my chest. "Marcus, with respect, the framework is the science. Without my stability protocols and the quantum encryption layer, Nexus is a paperweight. I was the lead architect on that entire half of the project. I should be on the stage. Thorne had given me a practiced, condescending smile, the kind reserved for junior staff asking for a raise they haven't earned. "Alara," he said, his tone dripping with false patience, "you do incredible, absolutely vital work. We all know that. You are the glue, but you are, how shall I put this delicately, the glue is not the masterpiece." He leaned back, the leather chair groaning. "The prize is for the conceptual breakthroughs, the big ideas. Your work is technical implementation. It's utility. It's back-end. It's not stage appropriate. Frankly, you're not important enough to be on stage at the ceremony. It's an optics decision. Hayes and Chen represent the academic rigor. I represent the business acumen and the capital. You represent the plumbing." The plumbing. Dr. Chen had looked away, pretending to examine a smudge on her water glass. Dr. Hayes, self-absorbed as always, was too busy mentally reciting his planned anecdotes about the moment the core equations clicked to even notice the exchange. The message was unmistakable, brutally clear. My expertise was recognized as necessary, but my contribution was deemed ugly. It was grunt work. It was invisible. It was unworthy of the spotlight. I was the engine, but only the hood ornaments were allowed to shine. I felt the sudden urge to smash the champagne glass against the polished marble floor. Instead, I carefully placed it on the nearest silver tray carried by a passing waiter. I needed a clear head. I had been told to be near the front, in the reserved Tier 3 seating. A nice seat, but decidedly not on the stage. My job was to nod, smile, and then melt back into the anonymity that was my professional brand. I didn't argue further in the penthouse. I simply looked at Thorne and said, "Understood, I will be in my assigned place." And I left. But I didn't go home. I went to my windowless office. I logged into my private maintenance terminal, and I started working. The genius of Nexus wasn't just its massive scale, it was its decentralized resilience. It was designed to run itself, to heal itself, to reroute energy and information around any failure point without human intervention. That was my guarantee. But a system that robust needs a master key, a technical kill switch, a single, centralized mechanism for maintenance and mandated shutdown. Not a hostile takeover, but a controlled pause for emergency upgrades. Every highly critical system has one. And I, the architect of the framework, was the sole human custodian of that master key. I spent the next 3 days doing what I do best: optimization. Not the system, but my access path. I wasn't doing anything malicious. I was simply creating a set of unlogged diagnostic privileges linked to a one-time access token that would expire precisely at 20:00 hours GMT, the exact moment the award presentation was scheduled to begin. I configured the token to activate a series of low-level, completely non-destructive infrastructure modifications within the Orion Auditorium's proprietary network. The Orion Auditorium wasn't just a fancy hall. It was owned and operated by a subsidiary of Ascendant Global. Its systems were, naturally, integrated into the larger company framework. The stage itself was a modern architectural marvel, a piece of industrial art composed of 3 massive, hydraulically controlled tiers that could rise, lower, and rotate to form various configurations. It was a spectacle. My targeted modification wasn't a hack. It was an administrative adjustment leveraging undocumented legacy protocols that only I, in my years of cleaning up the company's digital junk drawers, knew how to access. The stage's hydraulic system was controlled by a small, dedicated programmable logic controller, PLC, running an outdated version of Ascendant's Spectra OS. I wrote a small, self-deleting script, a graceful digital ghost, that would execute at the exact moment the lights went down for the dramatic introductory video. The script had one, and only one, function: to temporarily delevel the stage's structural integrity safeguards. Not to collapse it, not to cause physical harm. My fury was professional, not criminal. The goal was to make the stage, in a very specific, technical way, unstable, to make it impossible to use, to remove the platform of their arrogance. I closed the lid of my laptop. The silence in the office was deafening. The hollow pit in my stomach was gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold resolve. My work was done. Now, as the gala clock ticked down to the final 5 minutes, I moved through the crowd. I was an anomaly here. My dress, a deep sapphire blue, was elegant, but my posture wasn't celebratory. It was that of a predator assessing the terrain. I saw Thorn across the room, already preening for the cameras. He caught my eye and offered a brief, dismissive nod, a gesture of ownership, acknowledging his reliable, invisible subordinate. I returned a smile that felt genuinely pleasant. He wouldn't know that I had already checked the structural integrity of every floor joist in the building, except the stage. I found my assigned seat in the third row. Perfect. Clear sightline to the stage, but sufficiently distanced from the main action. I sat down just as the auditorium lights began their slow, calculated dimming, the signal that the ceremony was about to commence. The massive screens flickered, transitioning from the looping montage to the official Mercury Prize title card. A deep, dramatic orchestral swell filled the room. The moment of truth. My heart wasn't pounding, it was ticking, a precise, measured rhythm against my ribs. On the stage, Marcus Thorne, Dr. Hayes, and Dr. Chen had taken their positions on the highest tier. They stood under a spotlight, their faces gleaming with anticipation. This was their moment. The moment they would receive the adulation, the prestige, and the massive government contracts that followed. The moment they would bask in the glory that my plumbing had enabled. The voice of the master of ceremonies boomed through the speakers, deep and reverent. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed members of the global consortium, tonight we honor innovation. We honor the architects of tomorrow. We honor the Ascendant Global Nexus Project. Applause erupted. Thorne beamed, his arms already slightly raised for the coming ovation. The master of ceremonies continued. The Nexus Project is a triumph of theoretical physics and applied AI. A system so vast, so complex, that its very existence has redefined what we thought possible in global resource management. As he spoke, the script I had uploaded executed. It took less than half a second. My access token burned itself out, leaving zero trace in the event logs. The digital ghost vanished. The physical effect was immediate, and to the untrained eye, subtle. The stage, which was currently configured in a 3-tier, symmetrical pyramid, began to shift. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but in a way that screamed fundamental instability. The sleek silver seam between the highest tier, where the 3 executives stood, and the middle tier suddenly became visible. It widened by perhaps half an inch on the left side, causing the entire platform to list by the smallest perceptible degree. It was the shift of a ship that has taken on water, the slow, groaning displacement of weight. Thorne, mid-beam, faltered. His expression went from self-congratulation to a flicker of confusion. Dr. Hayes, leaning slightly, caught himself. Dr. Chen, ever pragmatic, was the first to realize the problem. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in pure clinical recognition of a structural failure. The master of ceremonies, oblivious, continued his script, raising the Mercury Prize statuette from its velvet-lined pedestal. And the people who brought this unparalleled vision to life are... Before he could announce the names, a second, more pronounced shift occurred. The entire front edge of the main tier, the tier closest to the audience, dropped approximately 3 inches, then juddered to an unsettling halt. It didn't fall, it canted. The hydraulic system, denied its structural redundancy protocols, had failed to maintain an exact level. The stage was now visually, and probably structurally, compromised. It was no longer a platform of triumph, it was a hazard. A collective gasp went through the audience. The applause died instantly. Thorne looked down at his feet, then back at the master of ceremonies, his face white with embarrassment and fear. "What in God's name is happening?" he hissed, his voice just loud enough to be caught by the sensitive stage microphones. The audio tech, in a panic, cut the live feed, but the damage was done. The entire room had heard the CEO's raw, unscripted terror. The master of ceremonies, a consummate professional, tried to save it. "Oh, we seem to be experiencing a minor technical adjustment. We apologize for the delay. The structural integrity of the Orion stage is, of course, absolutely paramount." He offered a weak, strained smile. But on the stage, the three executives were no longer composed. They were trying to back away, stepping gingerly to the less stilted parts of the platform. The system, as I designed it, had a final, elegant layer of defensive protocol that was now activating. The Spectra OS, detecting a significant, uncorrected structural deviation, initiated a Phase 1 mandated shutdown. A deep, resonating klaxon sounded, the sound of a hard emergency lockdown. The blue and white lights of the stage were instantly killed, replaced by the blinking, urgent red of the emergency strobes. Then the final, undeniable action, the stage's automated decommissioning sequence initiated. The three tiers, instead of collapsing, began to systematically lower themselves into the floor. Slowly, deliberately, with the metallic groan of heavy machinery yielding to an unseen force. Thorne, Hayes, and Chen found themselves sinking. The marble flooring of the auditorium began to rise up around them. Their feet were soon on the same level as the middle tier. Then the lowest tier. The prize statuette, dropped by the now-fleeing master of ceremonies, rolled across the sinking surface and fell with a dull thud onto the auditorium carpet, right at the feet of the first row. Within 40 seconds, the entire magnificent stage, the platform of their perceived importance, was gone. It had retracted fully, leaving only a perfectly flat, seamlessly tiled floor where it had been. The emergency lights continued to flash, painting the bewildered, silent faces of the elite crowd in crimson. I sat in my chair, unmoving, my sapphire dress blending into the sudden darkness. No one was hurt. No physical damage had been done to the building, only to the PLC that ran the stage. A few hours of work, a new motherboard, and a system reset would restore the physical platform. But the platform of their arrogance, that was entirely, beautifully gone. The entire event had paused. The ceremony was over. The lie had been exposed, not by words, but by the quiet, brutal efficiency of a perfectly executed technical sequence. The master of ceremonies was gone. Thorne, Hayes, and Chen stood on the floor, blinking in the red strobe light, surrounded by a ring of empty space, like three marooned sailors on an island of their own hubris. They weren't on a stage anymore. They were simply in a room, just people, unadorned, and profoundly, visibly unimportant. I rose slowly from my seat. My job was complete. The Nexus project was still stable, still running the world's power grid. The only thing I had destabilized was their ego. I began to walk out, slipping silently past the security guards who were now rushing toward the stunned executives. I heard Dr. Chen's voice, sharp and frantic, cut through the residual tension. "Marcus, this isn't possible. The Spectra OS has triple redundancy. Someone had to override the integrity protocols. Only one person knows those codes." I paused at the velvet-lined double doors, my back to the chaos. "Elara," Thorne's voice, laced with dawning horror and rage, carried across the marble floor. "Where is Elara Vance?" I didn't turn around. I simply stepped through the doors, leaving the sickly yellow light of the lobby for the clean, cool black of the night sky. I was no longer the plumbing. I was the force that had changed the architecture, and my story had just begun. The cool night air was a welcome shock after the suffocating heat of the auditorium and the sharper, more toxic heat of Marcus Thorne's rage. I didn't run. Running was for people who had committed a crime. I had performed a system audit, a necessary demonstration of a catastrophic single point of failure that should have been addressed long ago. My pace was measured, professional, as if I were leaving a long, dull board meeting. I had parked my modest, 6-year-old sedan 3 blocks away, a small rebellion against the usual executive parking hierarchy. As I walked, I could feel the vibrations of the city, the distant, continuous hum of the Nexus project maintaining the power grid, routing energy flawlessly, every circuit singing the song of its own perfect function. The irony was a sharp, delightful taste on my tongue. The world was utterly stable, and only the small, insulated world of Ascendant Global's elite had been utterly dismantled. I reached my car, slid into the worn leather seat, and pulled out my burner phone. It was a cheap, disposable device I'd purchased 6 months ago, purely for this eventuality. I had only one contact saved. Kira, my old professor from MIT's Applied Systems Engineering program, now a globally renowned cybersecurity consultant who operated largely outside the traditional corporate ecosystem. She specialized in ethical penetration testing, and more relevantly to me, in making large, embarrassing problems disappear into a haze of technical confusion. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice low and husky, already anticipating the call. "Ilara," she said, her voice a knowing half-smile in the darkness. "I assume the stage show was not up to your specifications." "It performed exactly as designed, Kira," I replied, starting the engine. The sound was a comforting, mechanical rumble. The PLC on the Spectra OS was running 3 generations behind on patch 417, and its integrity safeguards were fundamentally reliant on unencrypted UDP broadcasts from a master timing server which, I might add, was placed directly underneath the VIP champagne bar. Kira laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Of course it was. Thorn Central is always a fire hazard. You took down the whole platform. I'm seeing reports flash across the feed right now. They're calling it an unprecedented system malfunction." A total disaster, but 0 injuries. Classic Ilara Vance, the only collateral damage is reputation. "I need you to confirm that my access token deletion was irreversible, and that the Spectra logs are now showing a generalized power fluctuation error, consistent with the failure of the champagne bar's cheap commercial wiring, not a remote administrative override." "Already on it," Kira said, her typing clicking fast and rhythmic in the background. I had a worm program running in the background, a little distraction that mimicked the signature of a localized ground loop fault. When you made your move, my program cleaned up your digital footprint and simultaneously pushed the fabricated fault line to the fore. You never touched the Spectra OS. A faulty $15 circuit breaker did. I let out a slow, controlled breath. This was why I valued Kira. She understood the principle. The most effective way to hide the truth is to provide a highly believable, highly mundane alternative explanation. No one at Ascendant wanted to admit that their brilliant, custom-built stage system could be undone by the kind of electrical fault found in a mall food court. But they would accept it. Because it was infinitely preferable to admitting that their most trusted technical mind had engineered a moment of public humiliation. "So what's the consensus?" I asked. "The consensus is chaos. Thorn is screaming for a head on a pike, but Hayes and Chen are already on damage control, emphasizing the unforeseen infrastructure issue. They want to sweep this under the rug before the Mercury Prize committee revokes their award. They need this to be an external failure, not an internal sabotage. The optics are terrible, but the solution is clear. Blame the building. Blame the cheap contractors. Blame the champagne bar. Everyone except the people who designed the system." "Excellent," I said, pulling onto the main road. "And they won't be looking for me personally." "They will. But without a direct digital trail, they'll only have their gut feeling, and Marcus Thorne's gut is reliably self-serving. He'll look for a traitor, not an engineer. He'll look for someone who benefited from the destruction, not the person who executed the perfect, non-destructive decommissioning." "And my employment status?" "I'm monitoring the HR system. Nothing yet, but you should be prepared. You forced their hand. They can't fire you for a stage collapse, but they can fire you for insubordination or reorganization." "They will, Ilara, but you have a head start." "Thank you, Kira. The usual retainer will be in your offshore account by sunrise." "Always a pleasure doing business with the quiet ones. Now, where are you going? I'm assuming you didn't do all that just to go back to debugging legacy COBOL." "No," I said, turning the car west. The city lights were shrinking in my rearview mirror. "I'm going to make sure that the plumbing they dismissed is the only thing that saves their brilliant masterpiece." I hung up and tossed the burner phone into the glove compartment. My next destination was the Ascendant Global Data Center, located 40 miles outside the city, a massive, fortress-like compound known simply as the Engine. It housed the primary Nexus servers, the heart of the entire operation. My access card, my fingerprints, and my retinal scan were still valid. I was still, officially, Chief Technical Liaison. The truth was, the Nexus framework had one crucial, undisclosed vulnerability. It wasn't a flaw in the code. It was a flaw in the architecture, specifically in the way the highly sophisticated, proprietary quantum encryption layers interacted with the older, more stable legacy power management protocols. Hayes and Chen had dismissed my concerns about this interface during the development phase. Ilara, your job is to make it work, not to question the fundamental security assumptions of the architecture, Thorne had snapped, a year earlier. They believed the layers of encryption were impenetrable, that the redundancy was absolute. I knew better. I knew where the seams were. I knew that the brilliance of their AI model masked the brittle reality of its underlying infrastructure. The vulnerability was simple. A backdoor created by a foreign government-funded group, Project Chimera, that had been attempting to infiltrate Ascendant for years. I had discovered it 6 months ago. It wasn't a direct hack into the Nexus AI. It was a subtle, persistent zero-day exploit targeting the ancient telemetry system that communicated with older power plants, a system everyone assumed was too low-tech to bother with. The Chimera exploit wasn't about theft. It was about control. It allowed the attacker to slowly, imperceptibly, drift the timing parameters of the power flow across key geographical nodes. Over time, this would introduce a cascade failure not in the AI, but in the physical grid itself, a silent, slow-motion disaster that would look like an unprecedented series of unlinked, regional power outages. No one would ever suspect the Nexus AI, because its internal diagnostics would be green. The failure would be pinned on the obsolete infrastructure it was designed to manage. I hadn't told Thorne because I knew he would panic and try to fix it with a flashy, public patch that would only alert the attacker. I hadn't told Hayes and Chen because they would insist on a theoretical, highly complex fix that would take 6 months to validate and would inevitably break 3 other vital systems. Instead, I had been building my own solution, a parallel, hardwired subsystem, a digital bomb shelter, that would isolate the telemetry interface the moment the drift reached a critical threshold, manually taking those older power plants offline until the threat was neutralized. The installation of this subsystem was completed yesterday. But the final, critical step, the activation key, was set to be triggered only by the Chief Technical Liaison during a scheduled, highly secure Level 1 maintenance protocol, a protocol Thorne had, ironically, canceled to avoid interrupting his rehearsal for the Mercury Prize. I pulled up to the engine's main security gate. The massive steel barrier parted silently as my transponder was recognized. I drove through the outer perimeter, then through the inner. The guards waved me through. They saw Ilara Vance, the invisible, always working chief liaison, the one who was always there, the one who could be relied upon, the one who wouldn't interrupt a party. I parked in my usual spot near the Tier 1 server array. I entered the main facility, the air immediately chilled by the powerful cooling systems. The rhythmic thrumming of the thousands of servers was the only sound. It was the sound of billions of calculations per second, the sound of the world's economic and physical machinery turning without friction. I swiped my card at the door to the primary integration chamber. Access granted. The chamber was a cathedral of technology, towering racks of servers stretching up to a ceiling obscured by ventilation ductwork. The Nexus core, a glowing blue hemisphere housed in a pressurized containment field, pulsed softly at the room's center. I didn't head for the core. I headed for the far wall, where a small, nondescript panel was flush with the metal grating. This was where I had installed my subsystem, my little digital lifeboat. I logged into a maintenance port using my unique encrypted credentials. The system displayed the status of the Nexus framework, 100% operational, 100% green. Perfect. Then I ran my own proprietary diagnostic. This program, written entirely by me and stored only on an encrypted thumb drive I carried, bypassed the Nexus AI's internal reporting structure and directly measured the phase variance in the telemetry data. The results flashed up, cold and undeniable. Phase drift criticality index, 0.78. Threshold for cascade failure, 0.8. I had been right. The celebratory chaos of the gala had been the perfect cover for Chimera to push their final, subtle instruction set. They were 2 hours, maybe less, from initiating a slow-motion global energy collapse. The brilliant Nexus AI was completely blind to it, unable to recognize the physical world's subtle rebellion against its perfect digital modeling. This was the crisis I had been preparing for, the one my stage stunt had strategically paved the way for. If I had simply told Thorne that the system was in danger, he would have stalled, called a meeting, issued a press release, and fiddled while the grid burned. By sinking his stage, I had bought myself the crucial hour of silence, the window of unmonitored chaos, needed to execute the fix. All eyes were on the crumpled remains of the stage and the damage to the company's pride. No one was watching the actual technical infrastructure. I inserted the thumb drive and brought up the subsystem activation protocol. It required 3 levels of validation, a physical key, a fingerprint, and a high-level administrative code. I had all 3. As I began the activation sequence, the main door to the integration chamber slid open behind me. Ilara. The voice was that of Dr. Sonia Chen. Her face was a mask of cold fury and exhaustion, her expensive gala gown crumpled. Behind her stood Thorne and Dr. Hayes, both looking disheveled and frantic. They had abandoned the cleanup and followed their gut feeling directly here. I kept my eyes on the terminal, my fingers steady on the keyboard. "Good evening, Dr. Chen, Mr. Thorne. I assume the ceremony concluded early." "Cut the professional pleasantries, Vance," Thorne bellowed, rushing forward. He was radiating adrenaline and alcohol. "You think this is funny? You engineered a humiliating, catastrophic failure in front of the world's most powerful investors. I know it was you. Only you know the Spectra OS legacy backdoors." "I'm busy, Marcus," I said, not looking up. "You have a more pressing failure on your hands than a stage malfunction." "The only failure is your gross insubordination. Security," Thorne yelled, turning to the hallway. But the guards he had waved me past weren't his. They were the engine's technical perimeter detail, and they were trained to obey the senior-most authorized personnel inside the chamber, which at the moment was me. They remained outside. Chen, however, wasn't distracted by ego. She saw the terminal screen over my shoulder. Her scientific mind immediately processed the abnormal readout. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping. "What is that reading? Phase Drift Criticality Index. That's not a standard Nexus diagnostic. What are you running, Ilara?" "The diagnostic you all dismissed as unnecessary, Sonia," I replied, reaching for the physical key. It was a simple, copper-plated toggle. "Stop what you're doing immediately," Hayes finally spoke, his academic arrogance momentarily cracking into genuine alarm. "That index is proprietary to the old world subsystems. It's irrelevant to Nexus. You're attempting a local override. You'll break the global synchronization." "It's not irrelevant, Alistair," I said calmly, inserting the key. It clicked into place. "It's the seam between your beautiful, perfect theory and the ugly, messy reality of the copper wires. And that seam is being exploited by Project Chimera right now. In less than 2 hours, they will initiate a cascade failure that will be completely invisible to the Nexus AI. The grid will collapse, and your masterpiece will be blamed for its inability to manage it." I placed my thumb on the fingerprint scanner. Thorne lunged. "You lying bitch. You sabotaged the stage, and now you're fabricating a crisis to seize control. You're finished, Vance." His hand grabbed my wrist just as my thumb pressed the scanner. The system paused. "Voice authentication required," a cold female voice echoed from the terminal. "Chief Technical Liaison Code Alpha 9 Delta 7. "Let go of me, Marcus," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "No, you are in violation of protocol. You're fired. You have no authority here." Thorne's grip tightened, his panicked breathing loud in the cold chamber. Chen stepped forward, her face pale, but her eyes locked on the drift index. She was calculating. She was seeing the possibility of the truth. The humiliation of the stage meant nothing if the entire company was about to face a far greater global catastrophe. "Marcus, let her go," Chen ordered, her voice sharp. "The index is alarming. Even a false alarm warrants investigation. We can't afford to interfere with the only person who understands this legacy hardware." "She's lying. She just wants the glory," Thorne protested, but his confidence was wavering. The cold reality of the data center was a poor setting for his charisma. Hayes, surprisingly, was the one who reacted decisively. The threat to his theory's integrity was paramount. He grabbed Thorne's arm. "Thorne, you want to explain to the world why Ascendant Global caused the greatest blackout in history because you were worried about a technical employee's ego. Move." Hayes yanked Thorne back, freeing my wrist. I took a deep breath, looking straight ahead at the terminal. I had been told I wasn't important enough to be on the stage. But now, they were all standing in my engine room, terrified, relying on my plumbing to save their vision. My voice rang out, clear and steady, cutting through the electronic hum. "Alpha 9 Delta 7. The terminal beeped. Subsystem activation confirmed. Immediately, the light on the small panel on the wall turned a solid, reassuring green. My hardwired subsystem, my digital lifeboat, was now active. It had isolated the compromised telemetry interface and taken the vulnerable power plants offline, routing their load to backup systems. The Chimera exploit had been contained, its avenue of attack cut off cleanly and completely. I leaned back, finally looking at the three executives. They were watching the terminal display, waiting for the expected cascade failure. Instead, the Nexus framework's primary display blinked once, then settled back to a calm, perfect green. "What happened?" Thorne whispered. "Where's the error?" "There is no error, Marcus," I said, pulling the thumb drive out and slipping it back into my pocket. "The system is now secure. The problem you refuse to acknowledge is now neutralized." Chen stared at the green light, then back at me. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of intellectual shock, dawning understanding, and a sliver of professional respect. "You designed and implemented a redundant containment system entirely off-book, and you timed its activation to coincide with the only window of opportunity created by a corporate distraction event you also engineered." "I made sure there was no stage left, Sonia." I repeated the title of my own untold story. "Because I knew that was the only way I could guarantee I'd be uninterrupted in the engine room." Thorne, defeated, slumped against a server rack. The adrenaline was leaving him, replaced by a cold realization. I had saved his company from ruin, and in doing so, I had demonstrated a power he could no longer control. I stood up straight. "Now, Marcus, you can fire me for insubordination. But before you do, you should know that I am the only person who knows how to deactivate that subsystem without causing the very cascade failure I just averted. If I walk out of here, the Chimera exploit will remain dormant, but the vulnerable plants will remain offline, costing you billions in lost capacity. Or you can acknowledge that the plumbing is sometimes the only thing holding the masterpiece together, and allow me to move to the next phase of the operation." My power was no longer derived from my job title. It was derived from my irreplaceable knowledge, the silent, deep expertise they had so casually dismissed. The moment of invisibility was over. The silence that followed my ultimatum was heavier than the metal of the server racks. It stretched, taut and crystalline, broken only by the hum of the Nexus core. Marcus Thorne looked at Dr. Sonia Chen and Dr. Alastair Hayes, his eyes pleading for a solution, a technical rebuttal, anything to strip me of the sudden, devastating leverage I held. Dr. Chen, always the quickest to abandon emotion for logic, was the first to speak. She walked over to the terminal, her silk gown rustling against the cold, grated floor. She examined the display, cross-referencing my proprietary phase drift criticality index with the Nexus AI's seemingly clean telemetry data. "The index reading is valid," she stated, her voice devoid of its usual academic haughtiness. "It's measuring the subharmonic variance I warned you about, Marcus, back in the beta phase. We dismissed it as noise because the AI was filtering it out. But if Alara's claim about Project Chimera is true, then that noise was the precise digital signature of their attack." She looked at Hayes. "Alastair." "Hayes." who had spent the last decade building his reputation on the infallibility of the Nexus theoretical model, looked physically ill. "The subsystem is a crude isolation protocol," he muttered, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. "But it is effective. It acts as a perfect Faraday cage for the affected telemetry channels. It has successfully stopped the drift. If we try to take it offline without Alara's proprietary deactivation sequence, we risk a feedback loop that could destabilize the entire synchronicity matrix." He finally met my gaze, a flicker of grudging respect in his eyes. "You anticipated every possible failure point, Vance, even our own arrogance." Thorne clenched his fists, his face a roadmap of conflicting impulses, the need for revenge versus the imperative for corporate survival. He was the CEO, the face, the capital. He couldn't afford a global power outage that would erase Ascendant Global from existence. The Mercury Prize was just a vanity project. The engine was the company's heart. "Fine," he spat the word out, bitter and unwilling. "What do you want, Vance? A raise, a title change, the rights to the subsystem? I'll give you a chief architect title backdated to 6 months ago. We can make this disappear. We can spin this as a successful, pre-planned security drill." I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't want a promotion. I don't want a title. I don't want a cover-up, and I certainly don't want your spin." I stepped away from the terminal and walked toward the center of the chamber, forcing them to look at me, the person, not the terminal's screen. "I want the truth to become the foundation of the Nexus framework," I said. "I want full, undisturbed administrative control over the integration chamber and the engine for the next 48 hours. I need that time to analyze the full scope of the Chimera payload and integrate a permanent, AI-aware patch directly into the Nexus core." 48 hours, Thorne sputtered. "That's unacceptable. That makes you the most powerful person in this company." "I already am the most powerful person in this company, Marcus," I replied, calmly meeting his stare. "You just didn't realize it until I made your stage sink into the floor." I continued, my voice gaining a low, unshakable authority. "During those 48 hours, I am to have zero oversight and unlimited resources. Hayes and Chen will be available for consultation on their respective specializations, but they will take no action without my direct approval. And finally, you will issue a formal, unambiguous internal memo to the entire Ascendant Global staff, not a press release, an internal document, stating that the Nexus project was only saved from a critical security threat by the timely, decisive action of the chief technical liaison, Alara Vance, who identified and neutralized a threat that corporate oversight had missed." Thorne paled. "You want me to admit I was wrong. You want me to give you credit, after what you did at the ceremony." "What I did at the ceremony was prove that when the technical infrastructure is ignored for the sake of optics and ego, the entire system fails," I stated. "I need the staff to know who to trust when the next inevitable crisis hits. I need them to know that the plumbing is where the real power lies. This isn't about ego, Marcus. It's about institutional security and cultural correction. You need to restore faith in the technical core, and I am the only one who can deliver that message credibly now." Chen and Hayes exchanged a look. They knew. The technical teams, the engineers, the coders, the systems admins who worked the impossible hours, they all knew Alara Vance was the real foundation. An internal memo from the CEO acknowledging my action would be a seismic shift in corporate culture, empowering the very people who kept the lights on. It was a terrifying prospect for the C-suite, but in the face of absolute disaster, it was the only way to retain the loyalty of the talent needed to keep the company functioning. "We can't give you full administrative control," Thorne hedged. "There must be a backup protocol." "The only backup is the subsystem I just activated," I countered. "It's running on a time-locked cycle that must be maintained. You have 2 options, Marcus. Give me the keys to the engine, or I walk out of here, and you can explain to the consortium why you allowed a few hours of corporate vendetta to cause a worldwide grid failure." I looked at the glowing blue sphere of the Nexus core, then back at them. "The clock is ticking. Chimera won't stay quiet forever. I need to work." Thorne stared at me for another agonizing minute, his eyes burning with fury, but his posture finally deflated. He had been thoroughly and expertly outmaneuvered. The man who cared only about image had been forced to choose between his pride and the collapse of his entire empire. "Fine," he breathed out. 48 hours, full administrative control. Hayes, Chen, you are on standby. Alara, you send me the draft of that internal memo." A small, internal sense of triumph warmed me, a feeling far more satisfying than any trophy or applause. I had used their own rules, the rules of technical coherence and irreplaceable expertise, to defeat their rules of prestige and hierarchy. "The draft will be on your encrypted tablet in 5 minutes," I confirmed. "Now I need absolute silence and isolation. Please secure the chamber and return to your homes. You've had a long evening." Hayes and Chen didn't wait for Thorne's dismissal. They nodded curtly at me and practically fled the chamber, relieved to delegate the crisis. Thorne remained for a moment, his gaze sharp and venomous. "This isn't over, Vance," he warned. "It has just begun, Marcus," I corrected him. "And from now on, you'll remember exactly what the plumbing is capable of." He slammed the door behind him. The heavy click of the lock system engaging sealed the chamber. I was alone. I turned back to the terminal, and my focus became absolute. The human drama was over. The real work had begun. The Chimera exploit was a masterpiece of subtle deception. It wasn't malware. It was a time-delayed instruction set, a quiet suggestion injected into the telemetry system's buffer. It ordered the system to slowly, imperceptibly, lengthen the data packets originating from older power sources by a few nanoseconds each hour. This minute lag, compounded over a large network, created the phase drift. The Nexus AI, programmed to correct for random error, would interpret the lag as a need to adjust the global flow of energy, constantly fighting a phantom problem, introducing a self-destruct mechanism into the grid. My goal now was twofold. First, to find the source code of the exploit, the signature that would allow me to track its origin, and second, to build a permanent digital vaccine that the Nexus AI itself could administer. I didn't want to rely on my crude external subsystem forever. I needed to teach the masterpiece to recognize the seam itself. I worked methodically. I opened up 50 separate instances of the code, creating a three-dimensional model of the telemetry buffer's temporal architecture. I was hunting for the memory address where the original payload was stored. The memory was encrypted, of course, but I had designed the underlying encryption protocol 5 years ago, before I even started on Nexus. I knew its flaws. Hour 1, I bypassed the dynamic hashing algorithm using a rainbow table I had compiled years ago for an unrelated project. The encryption dissolved. I found the payload. It was a compressed, highly obfuscated assembler routine, a signature I immediately recognized. It wasn't just Chimera. It was a subgroup I had tracked before, known for their elegant, non-destructive attacks. They weren't criminals. They were nation-state actors playing a highly sophisticated, high-stakes game of global destabilization. Hour 6, I began to write the patch. It couldn't be a simple deletion. That would cause the very feedback loop Hayes feared. It had to be a mirror image of the exploit, a counter-routine that would run in parallel, slowly, gradually, and imperceptibly shortening the data packets back to their correct timing parameters. The Nexus AI would then see the system healing itself and settle back into its designed rhythm. It was digital acupuncture. I subsisted on lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My mind was sharp, focused by the certainty of the threat and the satisfaction of finally being given the complete, unfettered authority to solve it. This was my stage. This was where my importance was truly measured, in lines of code, not lines of applause. In hour 24, I hit a snag. The Chimera payload had a sophisticated, quantum-based failsafe. If it detected any non-Nexus administrative activity attempting to alter its execution environment, it was programmed to immediately detonate, causing the instant, catastrophic failure it was designed to achieve slowly. My new patch, while elegant, was a clear example of non-Nexus activity. I was trapped. I paced the cold floor, running the scenario through my mind a dozen times. I couldn't risk the counter-routine. I had to teach the Nexus AI to fix the problem itself, making the correction an internal process rather than an external intervention. I sat back down. The solution lay not in the telemetry code, but in the AI's core learning model. I accessed the Nexus core. This was the theoretical domain of Hayes and Chen. The algorithm was a complex, self-modifying beast designed to continuously optimize its own functions based on massive data input. It was perfect at recognizing patterns of energy usage, weather shifts, and economic trends. But it was blind to intentional, subtle digital deception. I began to inject a new set of parameters into the AI's training data. I wasn't rewriting the core code. I was simply feeding the system the phase drift criticality index as a new variable to monitor. I labeled it subharmonic error signature, SHES. Then, I provided the AI with a massive dataset of simulated chimera attack signatures, disguised as environmental anomalies. The Nexus AI was designed to self-correct errors. If it was given a new, clear definition of a catastrophic error, the SHES signature, it would, on its own, devise the most efficient, subtle, and permanent way to neutralize it. My job was to teach it to see the truth that Hayes and Chen had overlooked. I stepped back and watched the core. The blue glow of the sphere flickered, a sign that the AI was rapidly processing the new information. It was absorbing the concept of intentional digital deception. In hour 32, the AI began to generate its own corrective solution. It was a digital routine that was 1,000 times more complex, more elegant, and more integrated than anything I could have written. It was the masterpiece fixing the plumbing problem, recognizing that the integrity of the plumbing was essential to the survival of the masterpiece. The AI deployed its internal patch. It ran silently, weaving its correction through the global network. On my terminal, the phase drift criticality index began to drop. 0.78070.65. By hour 47, the index settled back at a perfect 0. The Chimera payload, finding its execution environment surgically and organically corrected by the Nexus AI itself, simply faded, rendered obsolete and harmless without ever triggering its failsafe. The Nexus framework was stable. The subsystem was now redundant. I was exhausted, my shoulders aching, my eyes dry. But I had done it. I had saved the company, the grid, and most importantly, I had forced a fundamental change in the ascendant global system by demonstrating, through action, the supremacy of unseen technical mastery. I leaned back, pulling the internal memo I had sent Thorne back onto the screen. It was short, cold, and factual. Subject: successful resolution of critical network event. 2. All ascendant global staff. From MRCUSTHORNE, CEO. This memo serves to confirm that the integrity of the Nexus project was compromised by a sophisticated, state-sponsored digital threat, Project Chimera, during the evening of the Mercury Prize Gala. This threat was successfully identified and neutralized, preventing a catastrophic global power failure. The only reason Ascendant Global stands today is due to the timely, decisive action taken by Chief Technical Liaison, Alara Vance, who designed and deployed a proprietary containment and counter-routine system that the corporate oversight protocols had failed to recognize. Ms. Vance's technical expertise and commitment to the foundational integrity of the Nexus framework is hereby recognized as the singular factor in averting global crisis. I closed the file. The 48 hours were up. I logged out of the systems, leaving the chamber exactly as I had found it. As I walked out, I saw Marcus Thorne waiting for me in the hallway. He was dressed in a fresh suit, but his eyes were bloodshot. "The index is 0, he stated, his voice flat. "The network is stable." "It is," I confirmed, "and the subsystem is deactivated. The Nexus AI now defends against the SHES signature autonomously." "I sent the memo," he admitted. 2 minutes ago, it's circulating now." "Good." He stepped closer, his jaw tight. "You saved us, Alara, but you destroyed the stage. You humiliated me on a global scale. You leveraged a national security threat to seize control. You are a threat to the corporate order. I am a threat to incompetence, Marcus, I corrected him. And I am no longer your employee. I tender my immediate resignation. I held out my access card. He didn't take it. You think I'll let you walk away with the keys to the kingdom? You know everything. I know exactly what I know, and that's why you won't stop me. My knowledge is not a threat to the system, Marcus. It's the insurance. If you try to punish me, the technical community will rally, and they will want to know why the hero of the hour was suddenly forced out. The optics of that, I promise you, are far worse than a sinking stage. I placed the access card on a nearby desk and turned to leave. Where are you going, Vance? He called after me, his voice a desperate mix of fury and fear. I paused at the door, but did not turn back. I was told I wasn't important enough to be on your stage, Marcus, so I'm going to build my own. The morning after my resignation tasted like liberation. I drove away from the engine as the sun was rising, turning the sky a pale, hopeful orange. My sedan, a symbol of my old, modest life, felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of corporate obligation. I didn't head back to my cramped apartment. That space was too closely associated with the old Alara Vance, the chief technical liaison who worked in the shadows. I drove until I reached the coast, the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. It was a reminder of scale, of how small Ascendant Global and its petty power struggles truly were in the face of the real, magnificent forces of the world. I found a small, rented house overlooking the water, paid for with the bonus I'd secretly allocated to myself 6 months ago, using a little-known executive technical grant protocol that Thorne had signed without reading. It was a modest, functional place, all glass and concrete, designed for clarity and focus. My new engine room. My first call was to Kira. She was already tracking the fallout. "You've gone viral, Alara," she announced, her voice filled with amusement. Not for the sinking stage. Thorne managed to bury that as a one-off infrastructure anomaly. But for the memo. That internal memo is leaking like a sieve. Every systems engineer, developer, and coder in the entire sector is reading Marcus Thorne's forced, grudging admission that Alara Vance single-handedly saved the Nexus project from a state-sponsored attack. "Good," I said, looking out at the crashing waves. "It's time the plumbing got credit for the integrity of the structure." Credit isn't enough for you, though. You quit. You saved the world's power grid, forced your boss to praise you, and then walked away. That's not a resignation. That's a mic drop exit. "I'm tired of working for people who mistake vision for competence, Kira," I admitted. "My next move requires no oversight, no ego, and no compromise. I need to build a platform that is entirely self-correcting, a model for how technical teams should operate." "And what does that look like?" "It looks like the anti-ascendant," I stated. Ascendant Global is built on the principle of centralized genius, a few brilliant people at the top whose work is buttressed by thousands of unseen technicians. That makes it vulnerable to ego-driven blind spots, as we just saw. I'm going to build a completely decentralized security and maintenance framework that is community-driven, open source, and designed to protect the very infrastructure that Ascendant Global manages. Kira paused. "You want to create a digital watchdog for the world's power grids, run by an anonymous collective of the best technical minds, built around the principles you just defended. That's massive, Alara." "It has to be. Chimera is still out there. Ascendant will find its next Vance, but they won't learn the cultural lesson. The real security of the world shouldn't depend on the sanity of one overworked engineer. It needs to depend on the collective vigilance of the best minds available." "How can I help?" "I need 2 things. First, leverage your network. I need the best distributed ledger architects, the most innovative cryptographers, and the most experienced open-source developers who are tired of corporate bureaucracy. People who understand that technical utility is the highest form of security." "Done," Kira said immediately. "They'll come to you. You're a legend now among the quiet ones. What's the second thing?" The Chimera payload left a signature, the trace of the nation-state actors who deployed it. I know their methods. They will try to find a new seam in the Nexus project within the next 3 months. I need you to create a small, private, encrypted chatter channel for me to communicate with the core members of my new team. A channel that doesn't exist on any known server. A ghost network only we can access. The code name for the project is the Watchtower. The Watchtower, Kira repeated, her voice full of anticipation. I love it. Consider it done. Start writing the manifesto, Alara. I'll start recruiting the watchmen. I hung up, feeling a surge of energy that had nothing to do with fear or obligation. I walked over to the desk, opened my laptop, and began to write. The first few weeks were a blur of intense, solitary work. I designed the Watchtower framework from the ground up. It wasn't about building a new AI. It was about building the perfect defense protocol for existing critical infrastructure like Nexus. The core concept was a decentralized autonomous organization, DAO for infrastructure defense. Instead of a single CEO deciding what constituted a threat, the Watchtower would rely on a consensus mechanism among its members. Any member could flag a potential vulnerability, a seam, and submit a proposed solution, a patch. The rest of the community would then validate the vulnerability and vote on the patch. Only when a 90% consensus was reached would the patch be digitally signed and distributed to be integrated by the actual power grid systems. The brilliance was in the transparency and distribution of trust. No one person could break the system, and every proposed change would be subjected to the fiercest, most competent peer review on the planet. I was taking the principle of open-source collaboration and applying it to national security, a concept deemed impossible by corporate and government entities alike. Kira delivered on her promise. Within a month, the Watchtower encrypted channel held 50 of the world's most brilliant, disaffected systems architects, cryptographers, and ethical hackers. They were drawn not by money, but by the manifesto I had drafted. We are the invisible foundation. We are the masters of the wires, the protocols, and the code that the world runs on. We were told our work was merely the plumbing. Now, we will prove that the plumbing is the first and last line of defense. We seek no glory, only integrity. We will be the Watchtower that never sleeps, defending the infrastructure that others take for granted. My first official communication to the group was simple. The problem is phase drift. The target is Nexus. The goal is permanent, self-administered immunity. The collective response was immediate and overwhelming. These were people who were tired of corporate fire drills, bureaucracy, and having their most crucial warnings dismissed by oblivious executives. They understood the SHES signature immediately and recognized the systemic weakness I had exploited. Elia's code name, Sentinel, a former DARPA cryptographer, proposed a radical new zero-knowledge proof protocol to validate telemetry data, a digital handshake so secure and complex that it would filter out the chimera signature without disrupting the flow. Dr. Li, code name, Flo, a Chinese data scientist who had been marginalized for her work on complex network dynamics, designed a stunningly beautiful AI subroutine that could be layered into the Nexus core. This subroutine wouldn't just fix errors. It would actively learn to identify the intent behind the anomalies. I acted as the integrator and validator, the person who synthesized the raw brilliance of the collective into a single, cohesive, working solution. My old job at Ascendant Global, the chief technical liaison, had prepared me perfectly for this. I was the one who could take all the disparate, highly specialized pieces and weave them into a functioning, scalable whole. 3 months passed in this rhythm: design, debate, consensus, code. The Watchtower framework, a beautiful, impenetrable lattice of decentralized security, was ready. It was designed to patch the global Nexus framework from the outside, making its correction appear to the Ascendant global system as a series of random, harmless, self-healing events. It was the ultimate, silent intervention. But there was one final, essential step: getting the Watchtower framework onto the global Nexus network without triggering the company's defensive alarms. This required access to the core. This required one last trip to the engine. I knew Marcus Thorne had tripled the security protocols at the engine after my departure, anticipating some sort of grand, retaliatory hack. But he was looking for a raid, a brute force attack. He wasn't looking for a surgical insertion of a solution. I needed an insider. I contacted Dr. Sonia Chen. I reached out to her on a secure, non-corporate channel, using a protocol I knew she had designed years ago for secure academic collaboration. She responded within 5 minutes. "I knew you'd call, Ilara. We've been a mess since you left. Alistair and Marcus are pointing fingers. They can't figure out the SHES patch you installed, and they're terrified you're going to use it against them." "I'm not interested in revenge, Sonia," I typed back. "I'm interested in permanent security. Project Chimera is active again. Their signature is resurfacing in the peripheral telemetry. They are testing a new zero-day exploit that will bypass the SHES patch in less than 6 weeks. Ascendant will not see it coming." "How do you know this?" "I have access to better eyes now. I have built the Watchtower, a decentralized, peer-reviewed defensive framework. It has a solution, Sonia. A final, complete solution that must be implemented directly into the Nexus Core API before the exploit is deployed. It's an open-source vaccine for the entire system." A pause of 5 minutes on the channel. I could almost hear her calculating the risk. The risk of trusting me, the risk of corporate betrayal, and the far greater risk of ignoring a looming global crisis. "If Marcus finds out, my career is over. He still views you as a criminal," she responded. "Your career is already over if Nexus fails. You know the truth, Sonia. The Watchtower framework is the only thing that will save the masterpiece you and Alistair built. I need 30 minutes of unlogged physical access to the primary integration chamber at the engine. You are the only person who can arrange that without triggering the Level 1 alert." Another pause, this one longer. Then a single line of text appeared. "When and how?" I smiled. Sonia Chen might have been silent at the boardroom table, but she was, at her core, a scientist. And a true scientist would always choose integrity over politics. She had realized that my new platform was the stage the Nexus project truly needed. We arranged the logistics with the precision of a military operation. The time, 02:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, the lowest traffic time for both data and personnel. The method, Sonia would initiate a bogus Tier 2 diagnostics protocol, a high-level, controlled power fluctuation test that would require her presence in the chamber and momentarily suspend the external retinal scans to prevent false positives. The plan was set. I drove back to the city under the cover of a dense, unexpected fog rolling in from the coast, the kind of atmospheric anomaly that the Nexus AI was still learning to predict. I bypassed the perimeter security of the engine easily. My old access card was useless, but the knowledge of the compound's subtle vulnerabilities, the blind spots in the camera array, the poorly secured vent access leading to the subfloor maintenance tunnels, that knowledge was still mine. I was the one who had mapped those vulnerabilities years ago in case of a legitimate physical breach. I emerged from the subfloor access, hatched directly behind the main server racks, unseen, my clothes smelling faintly of ozone and dust. I put on my old Ascendant Global Systems maintenance vest, a piece of clothing so mundane that it acted as the perfect camouflage. I entered the primary integration chamber. Sonia Chen was there, standing by the main console, her posture rigid with tension. The blue glow of the Nexus core pulsed softly. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "You actually came back. Thorne thinks you're halfway around the world, running a phishing scam." "Thorne thinks in terms of profit and vengeance, Sonia," I replied, walking swiftly to the console. "I think in terms of system stability. You have the access open." "Yes, I'm logged in as Administrator Level 0, the highest clearance. The external logs are paused for the duration of the diagnostics. You have exactly 28 minutes before I have to reboot the system and trigger the alerts." I pulled out a small, custom-built solid-state drive. It contained the entire Watchtower framework. I connected it to the highest-level API injection port, the one only used for kernel-level updates. "The Watchtower is a 3-layer defense," I explained, my fingers flying across the terminal. Layer 1 is Sentinel's zero-knowledge proof. It acts as an early warning shield. Layer 2 is Flow's intent AI. It teaches the Nexus core to recognize the purpose of the anomaly. Layer 3 is the DAO consensus protocol, a permanent, blockchain-based audit trail for all core updates. It will make it impossible for future leaders to implement a code change without the community's validation. No more unilateral Marcus Thorne decisions. Sonia watched, fascinated, as I began the insertion. The process was swift and precise. The Watchtower framework wasn't a patch. It was a fundamental, decentralized upgrade to the Nexus operating philosophy. You are distributing the company's most sensitive intellectual property to an anonymous collective, Sonia whispered, her voice a mix of terror and excitement. No, Sonia, I corrected, my focus still on the screen. I am giving Nexus the integrity it was designed to have. The Watchtower is the guardrail on the masterpiece. It won't control the power. It will only control the truth about its own code. Ascendant Global will still profit, but they can never again risk the world for the sake of their own pride. At the 20-minute mark, the insertion was complete. The Nexus core accepted the Watchtower framework as a native security kernel. It was seamlessly integrated, invisible to the company's standard diagnostics, but utterly central to the system's new defensive posture. The Nexus AI was, for the first time, truly secure. I disconnected the drive and turned to Sonia. It's done. You need to reset the logs now. She stared at me, then at the glowing blue sphere. You didn't just save the company, Alara. You re-architected the entire concept of corporate custodianship. I simply made the plumbing self-aware, I said, a slight smile touching my lips. And I proved that when you are told you are not important enough to be on the stage, the only correct answer is to make sure your new platform is the only one left standing. I slipped back into the shadows of the maintenance tunnels, leaving Sonia Chen alone with the immense, humming realization of what we had just done. The physical stage was still under repair, but the digital stage, the true platform of global power, had been rebuilt entirely on my terms. The immediate aftermath of the Watchtower framework's insertion was silence, an unnerving, corporate silence. Marcus Thorne and the entire Ascendant global leadership knew something had happened. The Nexus system was exhibiting an unprecedented level of stability and self-correction that went beyond the SHES patch I had installed. Yet, their diagnostics showed no external intrusion, no code change, only a cryptic, low-level kernel update logged under Sonia Chen's credentials. Dr. Chen played her part flawlessly. When confronted by Thorne, she claimed the system was simply benefiting from a delayed reaction to my original SHES fix, and that she had implemented a routine kernel hardening protocol to prepare for the inevitable next wave of Chimera attacks. Thorne couldn't fire her. She was too central to the theoretical model, and firing both me and her would confirm to the world that the Nexus project was a technical disaster zone. But Thorne was a shark. He didn't need proof, he needed a target, and that target was me. I knew the quiet war was coming. I was the visible face of their humiliation and the technical architect of their salvation. He couldn't attack the Watchtower framework because he didn't know it existed, and if he messed with the Nexus core on a hunch, he risked triggering the very systemic failure I had averted. So he would target my reputation, my life, and my ability to organize. I had already anticipated this move, planning my defenses from my seaside Watchtower outpost. The first attack came a week later. I woke up to a stream of alerts from my financial security feeds. Ascendant Global's legal team had filed a massive, multifaceted lawsuit against me. Theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, financial fraud, related to the technical grant bonus I had given myself, and dramatically, willful destruction of corporate assets, the stage. The civil suits were a smokescreen. The real damage was the criminal complaint filed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, alleging I had used my position to sabotage critical national infrastructure, the power grid, to coerce a financial payout. This elevated the battle from a corporate squabble to a matter of national security, something Thorne knew would tie up my resources and terrorize my potential allies. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, a stressed-out, high-powered corporate defense specialist named Valerie. "Alara, this is bad. This isn't a negotiation. It's a smear campaign designed to put you in a cage. Thorne is using his contacts in the Department of Energy to paint you as a domestic terrorist. The FBI has opened a preliminary investigation. We need to freeze your assets and prepare for a massive legal fight. How much of the Nexus code did you walk away with?" "None of the Nexus code, Valerie," I replied, my voice calm, the waves outside providing a soothing rhythm. "I left their proprietary code in their servers. The Watchtower framework is entirely my own work and that of my unaffiliated collaborators, and I am not freezing my assets." "You have to. They are going to seize everything." "Let them seize the money, Valerie. The moment they try to seize the assets that matter, they will run into a much bigger problem." The assets that mattered were the system's integrity of the Nexus framework. I had anticipated the asset freeze and had already placed my most sensitive data, the complete schematics of the Nexus core and the subsystem I had installed, into a distributed ledger that required the private keys of all 50 Watchtower members to unlock. If my bank accounts were frozen, my lawyers would file a countersuit detailing the exact, factual sequence of events that led to the stage collapse and the SHES patch installation, providing concrete evidence that I had saved the grid, not sabotaged it. This evidence was encrypted, stored on an offshore server, and programmed to be released publicly if my legal or personal safety was compromised. The one thing Thorne couldn't afford was the truth about Project Chimera being exposed, as it would destroy the company's reputation. I called Thorne's direct, secure line, the one he only gave to his closest confidants. He answered, his voice dripping with triumphant disdain. "Alara, so glad you called. I assume your lawyer has finished crying and informed you of the extent of your liability. You will be financially destitute and facing serious time, Vance." "The only thing destitute here is your company's security protocol, Marcus," I countered. "I'm calling to make a counteroffer. You retract the criminal complaint and the civil suits immediately, or I release an encrypted file detailing the full scope of the Chimera attack and the corporate negligence that allowed it to almost succeed. That file also details the precise, legal mechanism by which I leveraged your own signing authority to secure my technical grant, making the fraud charge non-existent." Thorne laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't risk destabilizing the entire sector by revealing a national security failure." "I'm not risking it, Marcus," I said, looking at the ocean. "I'm guaranteeing that the truth will be the final fail-safe against your incompetence. The file is already on a geographically distributed server network. It is set to release automatically if my physical or legal access to my own financial resources is restricted for more than 72 hours. Think of it as a digital dead man's switch. If you ruin me, you ruin yourself. And the world finds out that the great ascendant global nexus was saved by the plumbing that you tried to fire." The line went silent. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was calculating the risk-reward ratio of trying to destroy me versus letting me live. "You're insane," he finally muttered. "No, Marcus. I am an engineer. I designed a system of consequences you cannot bypass. You may be the CEO, but I am the custodian of the truth about your system. And the truth is the only irreplaceable asset in this entire ecosystem." I hung up. The waiting game began. It took Thorne only 24 hours to blink. He had his internal security teams verify the existence and location of the distributed file, a task I had deliberately made possible, but difficult. The risk was too high. He couldn't afford a public inquiry into the vulnerabilities of the Nexus project. The criminal complaints were quietly withdrawn, citing a misunderstanding of complex technical protocols. The civil suits were put into an immediate, indefinite hold. The smear campaign evaporated overnight. Alara Vance was no longer a target. She was an unarmed nuclear deterrent. The moment the legal threat was neutralized, I shifted my focus entirely back to the Watchtower. The goal was no longer to fight Ascendant Global. It was to use my unique position, the former engineer with deep system knowledge, to build the ultimate defense. Kiera and I began the quiet process of onboarding the Watchtower framework onto the rest of the global infrastructure that relied on the Nexus AI. The DAO consensus protocol was designed to look like routine, decentralized network traffic. It was hidden in the noise of the system, acting as an invisible audit layer over power plants and distribution hubs across 3 continents. We weren't hacking. We were simply activating the latent security features that should have been there all along, utilizing the open TCP/IP protocols that formed the base layer of the entire grid. Because the Watchtower framework was non-invasive, it only monitored the health of the core Nexus code and corrected vulnerabilities before they were exploited. It was welcomed by the technical staff at the utility companies, who were tired of corporate security protocols that were designed for compliance, not competence. I never spoke to Thorne again, but I received occasional, encrypted updates from Dr. Chen. Alistair is starting to see the benefits of the stability, but he can't admit it. He keeps running diagnostics, trying to find your intrusion, but the system is impenetrable. He calls it the Vance paradox. The more secure the system is, the angrier he gets. We had another close call with a new Chimera probe. The Watchtower recognized the signature and initiated a silent correction. Nexus self-healed before the probe was even 50% through its routine. No one here even noticed. The Watchtower had become what I intended, an invisible, essential platform built on the principles of collective integrity and technical truth. The people who ran the world's most critical infrastructure were now relying on the work of a dismissed engineer and her anonymous collective. I was no longer working for the system. I was working on the system, and the system was finally working correctly. But the most significant change wasn't in the code. It was in the cultural tectonic plates of the industry. The internal memo Thorne had been forced to send, the one praising my work, had done exactly what I intended. It had empowered the technical class. Engineers at Ascendant Global and other major tech firms began to organize quietly. They started demanding better support, more authority, and the kind of systemic integrity that put function over form. They cited my memo. They used my story. The narrative had shifted. The plumbing was no longer just the necessary foundation. It was the hero. My life became one of quiet, constant vigilance, split between the analytical beauty of coding and the strategic politics of managing a decentralized, powerful collective. The solitude of my seaside outpost was both a necessity and a comfort. One evening, Kiera called with an unexpected update. "You're not going to believe this, Alara. The Mercury Prize Committee released a statement this morning. Due to the unprecedented infrastructure anomaly at the ceremony and the subsequent high-level internal reevaluation of technical contributions at Ascendant Global, they are quoting Thorne's memo. By the way, the committee has decided to create a new category for the prize." I stopped typing. A new category. Yes, the Mercury Prize for Foundational System Integrity. It's specifically for the engineers who ensure the stability of revolutionary technology. And the first recipient, they just announced it, is Alara Vance. I walked to the window, watching the moonlight cut a silver path across the water. The irony was exquisite. I had destroyed their stage and was told I wasn't important enough to stand on it. Now, they had created an entirely new stage, a category of recognition specifically designed to acknowledge the very kind of work they had dismissed as plumbing. "They want to give me a trophy for the work they said wasn't stage appropriate," I said, a slow, deep smile spreading across my face. "They're trying to bring you back into the fold, Alara," Kiera warned. "They are trying to co-opt your rebellion." "Let them try," I said. "But there is one final, public stage that needs to be taken down, Kiera. The stage that says technical integrity must bow to corporate vanity." I had destroyed the physical stage. I had built the digital platform. Now I would use the new stage to deliver the final, undeniable truth. I would accept their prize, but I would do it on my terms. I told Kiera to contact the Mercury Prize Committee. "Tell them I accept, but I have one condition. The acceptance speech will not be delivered from their stage in the Orion Auditorium. It will be delivered from a live, secure broadcast that I will host myself. The audience will be the world. The platform will be the Watchtower framework. The preparation for the Mercury Prize for Foundational System Integrity ceremony was unlike any other in the prize's history. The committee, anxious to reclaim the narrative after the stage disaster and eager to associate themselves with the now legendary Alara Vance, agreed to every one of my demands. They didn't understand that by doing so, they were handing me the microphone and the stage itself. The prize would be accepted via a live, global secure broadcast, hosted not by a major network, but by the Watchtower framework itself. The technical challenge was immense. We weren't just streaming video. We were transmitting a perfectly encrypted, peer-to-peer feed through a dedicated blockchain-verified network designed by Sentinel Elias to prevent any corporate or state-sponsored disruption. The audience would not be accessing the broadcast through YouTube or a cable news channel. They would download a small, open-source viewer application, a piece of Watchtower code that ensured the signal's integrity from source to screen. The committee called it a high-tech presentation. I called it the ultimate demonstration of decentralized trust. From my seaside outpost, the final hours before the broadcast were filled with the quiet, intense activity of my Watchtower team. Kira handled the external communications, ensuring the press knew exactly where to download the viewing application. Sentinel monitored the network against potential DDoS or Chimera-style interference. I sat in front of my console, the entire room lit only by the soft, warm glow of my triple monitor setup, preparing to speak a truth that was about to echo across the globe. I had dressed simply, a dark, well-tailored suit that contrasted starkly with the ornate, formal wear of the committee members who would be shown presenting the prize from a separate, pre-recorded clip. I wanted the focus to be entirely on the message, not the messenger. At precisely 20:00 GMT, the broadcast went live. Across the world, millions of people, the engineers, the programmers, the utility workers, the academics, and the executives, who had downloaded the Watchtower viewer saw a screen resolve into crystal clarity. My face was centered, calm, and framed by the subtle, mesmerizing visual of Nexus telemetry data flowing across the background, the beautiful plumbing made visible. The broadcast began not with my voice, but with the voice of Marcus Thorne. A pre-recorded clip, sourced by Sonia Chen, was played for the first 30 seconds, the moment at the logistics meeting where he told me, "Frankly, you're not important enough to be on stage at the ceremony. It's an optics decision. You represent the plumbing." The inclusion of the clip was a violation of the Mercury Prize's carefully curated dignity, a final act of technical insubordination designed not for revenge, but for context. The screen transitioned back to me. The world was now listening. 2 months ago, I began, my voice steady and measured, the people who run the most critical systems on this planet, the power grids, the water supplies, the financial networks, were told that the utility of their work was less important than the optics of the visionaries. We were told that the masterpiece deserved the applause and the plumbing deserved the shadows. I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The truth is that the masterpiece is entirely dependent on the plumbing. When a house is burning, you don't run to the art, you run to the pipes. When a system is under attack, you don't rely on the theory, you rely on the engineer who knows where the seams are. I then addressed the Mercury Prize committee, who were watching in stunned silence from their gala dinner. I am honored to accept the Mercury Prize for Foundational System Integrity. By creating this category, you have finally acknowledged what was invisible. That integrity is the highest form of innovation. But this prize does not belong to me. I used the Watchtower viewer's unique capability to overlay real-time data onto the screen. This prize belongs to Dr. Sonia Chen, who stood for scientific integrity when her career was on the line, and risked everything to allow the necessary security measures to be installed. A small DAO token of appreciation, generated by the Watchtower Collective, appeared on the screen, detailing a donation made in her name to an academic grant for systems engineering. This prize belongs to Elias, Sentinel, Dr. Lee, Flo, and the 50 anonymous architects of the Watchtower framework, who proved that the best defense is not found in corporate boardrooms, but in a decentralized collective of the world's most brilliant, disaffected technical minds. As I spoke, the screen displayed a cascade of Watchtower network activity, millions of lines of code being audited, validated, and signed by the collective across the globe. It was a beautiful, mesmerizing proof of the system's function. And most importantly, I continued, my voice firming with resolution, this prize belongs to every engineer, every coder, every sysadmin who has been overlooked, underpaid, and dismissed as not important enough. Your expertise is the single most vital component of the modern world. You are the only ones who truly understand the truth about the system. I shifted the focus to the Ascendant Global Nexus project, pulling up the technical schematic I had secretly maintained. To prove the necessity of this new platform, I must reveal one more truth. The Nexus framework is now secure. It is running on a defensive layer that is peer-reviewed, vulnerability-aware, and self-correcting, a system that makes it practically impenetrable. This framework was installed without Ascendant Global's knowledge or consent after the leadership demonstrated that they would prioritize optics over security. A collective gasp could be heard across multiple live news feeds that were, ironically, pirating my secure signal. The Watchtower is here to stay. It is the silent guardian of the Nexus project and every other piece of critical infrastructure that the collective chooses to adopt. We do not seek control over power or profit. We seek integrity over vulnerability. We are the independent audit layer, the plumbing that holds the masterpiece to account. I concluded the speech with a direct message, not to the executives, but to the global technical community. When I was told I wasn't important enough to be on the stage, I made sure there was no stage left for them to stand on. I replaced it with a platform built on truth, transparency, and technical utility. I urge every single person listening, if your expertise is being dismissed, if your warnings are being ignored, do not resign. Do not sabotage. Re-architect. Build your own platform. Make your work irreplaceable and your integrity uncompromising. The time for invisibility is over. I lifted the bronze Mercury Prize statue, which had been delivered to my house by a terrified, low-level courier, and held it up to the camera. It reflected the light of my monitor setup. This prize is the last trophy of the old world. The Watchtower is the first foundation of the new. I then ended the broadcast abruptly. The screen went dark, leaving the world with the stark image of the flowing code and the lingering silence of my final words. The reaction was instantaneous chaos. Ascendant Global's stock price plummeted. Marcus Thorne was dragged into an emergency board meeting. The Mercury Prize Committee scrambled to issue a damage control statement, simultaneously praising my unconventional passion and denouncing my unauthorized use of the platform. But the technical community was galvanized. The Watchtower Viewer application, containing the foundational DAO protocol and my initial manifesto, became the most downloaded item in the global repository. Developers and engineers, emboldened by the truth, began submitting vulnerabilities from their own companies to the Watchtower for peer review. The decentralized platform was officially operational, running on the fuel of professional honesty and collective intelligence. I received a frantic, encrypted call from Kira. "The world is on fire, Alara. Thorne is demanding the government charge you with treason. He's calling it the biggest cyber extortion in history." "Let him," I replied, calm. "He can't touch the Watchtower. It's not a server, it's a consensus. And the government can't prosecute me without revealing the Chimera threat and admitting Ascendant's negligence. He's trapped in the system I designed. He's sending a private security team to your location, Alara. He just sold a massive block of shares to cover the cost. You need to move." I looked out at the dark ocean. I had been anticipating this final, predictable, brute force move. Thorne wasn't a hacker, he was a strongman. When the code failed, he would resort to muscle. "I know," I said, "but I'm not running. I've designed the exit, Kira. It's time for the final act of systemic integrity." I walked over to the console, pulled up one final, private piece of code. a tiny, self-destruct routine, and connected a hardwire to my car's GPS and remote starter. I'm going to disappear, Kira, and I'm going to make sure that my final stage is the most permanent one of all. I watched the red dot on my console, the tracker for Thorne's private security detail closing in. They were 30 minutes away, moving fast and discreetly in 2 unmarked vehicles. Their mission wasn't to arrest me. It was to neutralize the threat and, most importantly, to retrieve the proprietary knowledge they believed I carried. They would assume I had physical backups, encrypted drives, or perhaps a final, deadly kill switch to the Nexus core. They were looking for a device, not a legacy. I walked around the seaside house, the glass walls reflecting the faint pre-dawn light. This had been my watchtower, the physical symbol of my independence and my mastery over the code. I didn't need it anymore. The watchtower was no longer a location. It was a decentralized idea, a self-sustaining protocol embedded in the world's infrastructure and in the collective consciousness of the technical community. I went to the command center, the 3 monitors, the keyboard, and the small, powerful server unit. I ran my final routine. The goal wasn't to destroy my work, but to make it uncorruptible and untouchable. I initiated the Ghost Protocol. First, I executed a powerful digital wipe on my local system. Not a standard deletion, but a 7-layer overwrite using random quantum data that would render the drives not merely blank, but physically impossible to recover. The digital equivalent of turning the hard drives into pure, useless silicon. Everything I had worked on locally, the drafts of the manifesto, the internal communications with Kira, the minute-by-minute logs of the Watchtower's growth, all of it was vaporized. The only place the Watchtower code now existed was in the DAO's distributed ledger and within the Nexus core itself. Next, I turned my attention to the last remaining physical asset they might covet, the console itself. I had wired the keyboard, the monitors, and the internal components to a powerful, non-traceable EMP unit sourced from my old military contacts. The moment the power cord was pulled, or the entire unit was moved, the EMP would fire, instantly fusing every circuit board into a lump of inert metal, ensuring no forensic trace could ever be pulled from my final command. My final act was the most poetic. I went to the desk, pulled out the bronze Mercury Prize for Foundational System Integrity statue, and placed it prominently in the center of the control station. It was the only object in the room that would survive the EMP. I wanted Thorne's men to find it. I wanted them to know that I had taken their recognition and used it as a monument to their own defeat. I walked out of the glass house. The air was cold, damp with sea mist. I looked back, seeing the perfect, pristine silence of the room, the glowing monitors displaying a blank terminal interface. I got into my sedan. This car, my last tie to my former life, would serve one final purpose. I started the engine. The sound was a comforting, mechanical roar. I opened the code on the burner phone and entered the final command sequence. Initiate farewell. I drove. I didn't accelerate rapidly. I drove at a moderate, legal speed down the coastal road, heading away from the city and deeper into the rural mountains. I needed to put a specific distance between the house and myself. As the security detail reached the edge of my property, their vehicles were tracked by the small GPS chip I had planted in my old Ascendant Global Access card, the one I had symbolically left on the desk when I resigned. The chip, now active, sent its final burst of data. At the house, Thorne's security team would see the empty command center and the prize statue. They would assume I had just left. They would look around, search the empty room, and inevitably they would reach for the valuable electronics. The moment they touched the console, the EMP would fire. All the intelligence they were hopping to recover, the logs, the traces, the last vestiges of my work, would vanish in a silent, permanent electronic flash. The only thing left would be the bronze statue, a mocking monument to their failure. But the Ghost Protocol had a second, more crucial component. As I drove, I saw the headlights of a car rapidly approaching in my rearview mirror. It was the lead vehicle of the security detail. They had found my car's signal and were giving chase, desperate to intercept me before I could escape the area. They assumed I was carrying the keys to the kingdom. I checked my distance. 3 kilometers, perfect. I pulled the car to the side of the winding mountain road, cutting the engine. I opened the door and stepped out, the cool, wet air shocking my skin. I stood on the side of the road, looking back at the approaching headlights. I held the burner phone, my finger hovering over the final command, the ultimate act of self-extinction of my physical footprint. I typed the command, execute remote demolition. The sedan was my final, massive piece of physical evidence. I had, over the last few weeks, installed a carefully calibrated, high-energy thermite charge in the engine block and the fuel tank. This wasn't a bomb. It was a total incineration device. It was designed not for destruction, but for the complete molecular obliteration of all physical evidence. The approaching headlights were 50 meters away. I saw the flash of the security team inside, recognizing me, preparing to rush my position. I pressed enter. A fraction of a second later, my sedan did not explode. It simply vanished in a blinding, instantaneous flash of white-hot heat. The thermite charge consumed the car, metal, plastic, leather, and everything inside in a single, self-contained inferno. The heat was so intense it would scorch the asphalt and fuse the remains into an unrecognizable black mass. All evidence of my presence, my DNA, my fingerprints, my last traces of clothing, were utterly and completely incinerated. The security vehicle slammed on its brakes, the guards spilling out, blinded and confused by the sudden, massive flare of light and heat. They would see the column of black smoke, the molten remains, and they would realize the truth. Alara Vance was gone. Not hidden, not on the run. Gone. I didn't wait. I stepped off the side of the road and into the dense, dark woods, leaving the noise, the smoke, and the chaos behind me. My path had been pre-planned, mapped using obscure satellite imagery and old hiking trails. I knew the area intimately. I didn't carry a bag, a phone, or any identification. I was a ghost, finally untethered from the world of addresses, job titles, and bank accounts. I had destroyed the stage of their arrogance. I had built the platform of integrity. And now, I had obliterated the final, physical evidence of my existence as an employee of Ascendant Global. My stage was no longer a physical place. My importance was no longer tied to my presence. It was permanently woven into the fabric of the system. I walked deeper into the forest, listening to the sounds of the night, no longer the low hum of cooling servers, but the natural rhythm of the wind and the trees. My work was complete. The Nexus framework was stable, the watchtower was vigilant, the plumbing was secure. The masterpiece had been saved, not by the visionaries who built it, but by the woman they had told wasn't important enough to stand on their stage. And now, I had ensured that the only stage left was the permanent, invisible, decentralized platform of the truth. I was free.